though. So I don't know what he means by the Lord.
I don't mean you. I love you.
I love you too, Gary.
I know.
Well, this is the part of the breakfast where we start making a video record, so I want to urge everybody to behave from this point on. And we've got a few announcements, and then we're going to go straight to our speaker. Nothing big going on at the moment. Let's see. Recordings on YouTube and Facebook are available as always. Don't take the badges home with you. Don't take the badges home with you. If you'd like prayer after the breakfast, we have prayer teams. I think they'll be set up. You know where they're going to be set up?
Not yet.
Not yet? They'll probably be in one of these corners.
Yeah, somebody kick out.
But just walk around looking like you need prayer, and they'll find you. Well, let's see. Our next prayer breakfast, our 37th one, is going to be October 19th. It'll be Father Scott Jones, who's the new vicar for the Northern Vicariate. And our first one in 2005, we haven't got a date set yet. It's Father John Brocklin, is the Western Vicariate. And it's hard to set a date with him. So if you got to do it, start early. And just one thing I wanted to say to you guys, I noticed a lot of you didn't come alone this time. You came with a friend or a family member or something, and it just warms my heart to see you doing that. That's what we really meant for the breakfast to be, was something we men do together and share. Because ultimately it's about what the Holy Spirit's doing in us. And so the more of us there are, the better that can happen. Father Carl Scheble, I guess we're going to ask all day, how do we pronounce that? Okay, we can pronounce it any way you want. So I think he'll set us straight once he gets up to talk. He's the vicar who's always been a vicar. He's the Vicar General. And when he described that, we put it right in the literature we put out, was it's like as if he were the pastor of all the Catholic organizations here at Regali Center. So this is our first speaker where we're actually on his turf. We're on your turf right now, aren't we? Okay. So please give a warm welcome to Father Carl.
Good morning. Thank you for your warm welcome. It's great to see former parishioners, and it was wonderful to have a great breakfast on top of it, so thank you for everything. In terms of my name, it's Father Carl Scheble. That's everybody calls me Father Carl. It's a lot easier than the Scheble part. So Father Carl is just fine. So when I was asked to do this, my biggest hesitation was I was told that I'm supposed to talk about 45 minutes. Don't worry, I won't do that, because I don't know how to do that. I have been a priest 41 years, and I have spent my life trying to whittle down my Sunday homily to 5 to 7 minutes. I don't know how to expand anymore. So when I was told I still, though, have to try to make up the time best I can, what I thought I would do is just to kind of reflect on my life step by step. Again, not about me, though, but hopefully to help you to do it in your own life. And for me, to reflect over my life, it's really been that idea that I see God's movement in my life in hindsight. At the time, I don't get it, I don't understand it, but as I look in that rearview mirror, I see how the connections are made and how God got me to where He wanted me to be. So we're here at this Zechariah ministry. I think about Zechariah, he was this high priest. He was certainly a person who was well educated. He was a person of prominence in the community. His wife Elizabeth, don't know what her educational background was or wasn't, but she certainly also lived in that life of high society. They have this son, John the Baptist, who's going to set the world on fire. And my family was nothing like that. My dad was a child of the Depression. He lived all over the place, literally, North City, South City, out in the suburbs, and even out in the country. My sister's done a bit of genealogy. It probably was, again, during the Depression, times were tight. I don't doubt my family was kind of running away from debt collectors, to be quite honest. My grandparents, his parents, were pretty poor. In fact, they lived in public housing for a while. My dad was a fireman, a St. Louis City fireman, and if you work for the city, you live in the city, and so we lived in North City because he was always assigned to houses up north, one by St. Mark's High School, up the old Page and Academy neighborhood. Then he retired out of Walnut Park. During that time, when I was in my late high school into college, he finally got his GED because he had to start work in 8th grade. Again, being a child of the Depression, never had a chance to work through all of that stuff. And yet in the midst of all that, my dad could fix anything and was an incredibly hard worker. That's right. Oh, please.
Go ahead and speak.
I have horrible allergies and they all go in my throat. Okay, there we go. So that was my background. That's my dad. Just this simple man, hard worker, who's going to get turned again. It's eating up the time. Good deal. And then there's my mom, again, a child of the Depression. Her dad, my grandfather, was Karl, but Karl with a K. I was named after him, Karl with a C. He lived in Cologne, Germany, and his family had some kind of a bar or maybe a microbrewery, I don't know. But he came to St. Louis specifically to look at the different breweries in town, Anheuser-Busch, Lemp, the rest. But while he was here in St. Louis, World War I breaks out. He basically gets interned. He can't go back. And that's where he meets my grandmother somewhere, somehow in the midst of while he's here in St. Louis. But all I knew of my grandfather was my mom told all of his kids. He passed before she even got married. My grandfather became a pretty bad alcoholic. Was it because he was hurt that he couldn't go back home? Supposedly his family kind of cut him off with the war and all the rest, or whatever the case was. My mom would tell stories as a kid growing up. She and her mom would go to the corner confectionery and kind of make a deal with the owner saying, when my husband sobers up, he'll get back to painting. That's what he did for a living. And we'll be able to pay you back, but can we have some food now? So my mom grew up pretty poor as well, probably more poor than my dad. Mom and Dad get married. They have 4 children. I have 3 older sisters, one 12 years older, one 7 years older, one 5 years older. So not only am I the only boy, I'm the baby, I had 4 mothers, basically. That's a fate worse than death, let me tell you. As I mentioned, my dad was a city fireman. He worked up north, so we always lived north. We lived on College Avenue, not too far from the Pink Sisters, if you know where that's at. By the Grand Water Tower, that's kind of where we lived. And then in 1960, we moved to Baden, right by the Halls Ferry Circle. I lived 4 blocks away on Hornsby. My grandmother had lived across the street from us on College Avenue. We lived in a 2-family flat. She lived across the street in a 2-family flat also, about on the first floor. When she passed away, my mom said, I am tired of carrying groceries upstairs. Let's find a house on 1 floor. That's when we moved to Baden. So that's where I grew up. Grew up within a few blocks from Mount Carmel Church, so that's why I went to grade school, went all through there. My family, though, wasn't very involved. My mom and dad went to Sunday Mass, but that was about it. They were not involved in men's club, ladies' club, anything more than that. So, of course, I wasn't either. Baden was a great little neighborhood to grow up. We used to ride our bikes everywhere. I went through, like I said, Mount Carmel grade school. I played basketball and baseball, not very well, but I played them. In 6th grade, I could start to work. Again, my dad was a hard worker, as was my mom, and we all had to do the same. So in 6th grade, I started delivering the Baden News on Wednesdays, and on Saturdays, I would cut grass in the neighborhood. In 8th grade, I'm all set to go to DeAndre's High School. DeAndre's High School would have been the regional high school in North City, but it was also the year they announced that it would possibly close. So I can still remember, I'm in 8th grade, it's in April, so transcripts and everything are already sent. We were told that DeAndre's was only going to be given 2 more years. If they could succeed, fine, but if not, it would be closed after 2 years. So in other words, those of us who were going to go to DA were offered another option because they couldn't promise we would graduate. We may start, but we may not be able to finish in 4 years. So that's when Prep North opened for seminary and non-seminarian. We had 2 high school seminaries, one right here, Prep South, and one Prep North up in Florissant. They weren't boarding high schools, they were regular high schools. They were just staffed mainly with priests and religious, with kind of a vocational bent. We had service projects, we did yearly retreats and the rest, but otherwise a regular high school, but with a vocational thrust. And so with DeAndre closing, those of us who wanted to go to another school were told where we had to go, because this is the baby boom generation. DeBerg doesn't have an empty desk. Aquinas doesn't have an empty seat. Rosary, none of those. Everybody's packed to the gills in the baby boom generation. So that's why Prep North opened up for seminarians and non-seminarians. So those of us from Walnut Park, Pine Lawn, and North City were segregated up to Prep North. So I went there as a non-seminarian. I had no intention of being a priest. I just wanted to go to school and graduate in 4 years. Now, looking at that in the rearview mirror, how did God work in all of that? I certainly feel blessed to have that simple kind of a background and living a very simple life, because that's and you'll kind of hear as I go on, has really played a real important part of my life as it unfolds. To be very comfortable with little to nothing, to not worry about aspirations, to just be grateful for what we have and to appreciate the gift right here and right now. Another thing as I look back at that time, I'm really glad my mom and dad instilled within us, my sisters as well, a very strong work ethic. So again, my mom's a stay-at-home mom, my dad's working as a city fireman. I want to say when my dad retired, I think he retired at like $27,000 a year. They never made much back in the day, that's why they always worked on their day off. My dad always had 1 to 2 other jobs. So when it came for us for high school, my sisters and I, we all had to work to pay for high school. We all had to work to pay car insurance. I groaned a lot at the time, but in looking back, I'm glad I had that. I'm glad I had that sense of working, of providing for the family as I could in the ways that I could. I also look back on my life. Growing up in North City was an incredible blessing, just for that to be my home. To know the area, to know the place. Even though the neighborhood may have changed, it still feels like home. I know where the streets go, I know where they end, I know how it all fits together. And there's a sense of home in all of that. Also growing up, was, again, a changing neighborhood in Baden, we lived there from 60 till 78. Changing neighborhood, so my classes through Mount Carmel, we had more and more African Americans coming in. I'll mention a little bit, I worked at the Circle right down the street from me. There was a Schnuck store there. I worked there. My bosses were African American. So again, it was a good way to learn and to grow up from the very beginning of working together. And then going to Prep North was really when I started to think about vocation. That would have never happened otherwise. So again, God put me in the place where he knew he wanted me to be, but it's not a place I would have chosen. It wasn't even on my radar. But again, in hindsight, it makes all the sense in the world. And I'm sure you guys can think of that same thing in your own life. From the very beginning, how God has begun a path for you to get you to where you are today. So then I go to Prep North for high school. And the men that I went to school with, they're friends to this very day. In fact, this afternoon, one of the guys has got a place down at Lake Tishomingo, about 11 of us or so are going to go down there. They're going to bring their wives. I'm not. Just going to have a chance on the lake, the barbecue, have a few beers. I am so blessed. I've been friends with those guys over 50 years. We graduated in 75. I'm old. And again, what a blessing. What a blessing to have that. It would have never happened had God not had me go to Prep North. As I mentioned, when I got 16, I started working at the Circle Schnucks. Do you remember back in the day, Schnucks used to have restaurants embedded in their stores? They called them station restaurants. That's where I worked. There was a little snack bar station restaurant in Schnucks. For those of you who don't know what the idea was, if the smell of food would waft into the store, folks would buy more. That's exactly what Mr. Schnucks had in mind when he put those restaurants in there. So working again at the Schnucks Circle store was wonderful. Again, this is back in the days where those who were older would work during the day. It was all us high school, college kids who worked at night, the checkers, the produce folks. So again, it was another family, another great community, another place to grow up as a kid. Also, during my time of high school, I started working on cars. So as I would cut grass in grade school, I'd, of course, work on the lawnmowers during the winter, clean the carburetors and get the floats working right and get the grind valves and all the rest. Started working on cars because, well, I'm 16, I can drive them. I become a gearhead. And that, too, was a really good experience for me, not just the mechanical part of it, but again, the friendships that it brought. And it also gave me time to work with my dad. As I mentioned, he was a fireman, so he's working 24-hour shifts. So when he's home, he's working that second job. He'd always kind of help out with the construction company. Third job oftentimes was helping with a plumbing company. So our time together, more often than not, was working on the car together. And again, what a blessing that was. Because had we not had that together, I don't know how much time my dad and I would have spent together, not for any reasons like we clashed, but just because there just wasn't time. The way my dad worked all the time, that was one of the few intersection points. And again, what a blessing. At Prep North, like I said, we were seminary and non-seminary. And in fact, again, my class was the first class to be that joint group. Our class was 74, 78, something like that. Our class was as big as sophomores, juniors, seniors combined. So we really shifted the tenor of Prep North from then going forward. And like I said, it was for seminary and non-seminary, so we could date. We just couldn't have dances on site, but we could date. So I had a girlfriend, Joan. We dated for 2 years. And again, this is high school. Oh, I'm going to get married. I'm working at Schnucks in the restaurant. I can provide all that kind of romanticism kind of stuff. We broke up right before Christmas of my senior year. And as I mentioned, Prep North still had kind of this vocational thrust. We still had service projects. We still had retreats. And shortly after we broke up, and I was a jerk, I'll admit it was on me, we had our senior retreat. And during this retreat, we had to meet one-on-one with one of the faculty who were kind of chaperoning us at the retreat center. And it was Father Jim Schaefer. Some of you guys might know him, especially from Sabina's and the rest. I'm with Father Schaefer, and he goes, "Carl, did you ever think about being a priest?" "No." He goes, "Well, why don't you think about it?" And again, had I not broken up with Joan, this is God in the rearview mirror again, had I not broken up with my girlfriend, that avenue would have never been open. And had Father Schaefer never personally asked that specific question, "Do you ever think about being a priest?" would have never made the leap, much less the connection. Again, God in the rearview mirror. Now, at the time, I was crushed that we broke up. But now it all makes sense. And again, how God was weaving that tapestry the whole way through. Because I do decide to go to the seminary, I come to the building over there, Cardinal Glennon. This was Kenrick. Glennon was the college seminary. This was the theologate. I went to Glennon for 4 years. And it was there that my vocation became real. And what made it real for me was the field education, the apostolic works. Academically, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed. Philosophy was way over my head. But I enjoyed doing the practical work of priesthood. So our first year, we worked with the elderly. We visited hospitals, we visited nursing homes, we visited independent living, we visited the elderly who were homebound. Our second year, we worked with youth. I was assigned to St. Vincent's Orphanage. I worked up there. I was a house parent, in fact, for 2 of those summers. Third year, we worked in the inner city. I was assigned to what is now St. Augustine's, but it was St. Mark's, St. Barbara's back at the time. And our fourth year, I taught PSR at St. Justin the Martyr. And it was doing that priesty kind of stuff that I thought, I could do this the rest of my life. It's varied, it's something that I found very engaging, something I really enjoy doing. And so that's why I could say yes. Yes, I could be a priest because this is life-giving for me. That field education kind of stuff, the pastoral ministry things were real for me. So I send in my transcripts, my registration for this building, Kenrick, and it is the day that we're practicing for graduation, for senior year. So like it was a Thursday, and we're going to graduate on a Saturday. It's Thursday, and we're practicing for graduation. The rector of the college seminary says, Carl, and Rick Delaney was the other gentleman, Cardinal Carberry wants to see you guys at 1 o'clock today. You're going to be asked to go to Rome. Well, again, really out of the blue, but just to kind of come into that. So my spiritual director, well, let me back up from that. So the rector of the college seminary announces to the faculty at noon, again, we're going to meet with the cardinal at 1, he announces to the faculty, he goes, well, just goes to show you don't have to be smart to go to Rome anymore. They asked Scheble this year. He literally said that because it came back to me a few times, and it's true. And again, it was out of the blue. What happened was Cardinal Carberry had already submitted his letter of resignation. He was 75. He had always sent 2 guys to Rome every year. He was an alum himself. He loved the place. And the reason why I went, because the guys who were above me, which is like every one of them, weren't too sure about going on or weren't too sure about being priest down the road. And I felt pretty confident. So that's why I went. Not for smarts, but he wanted to get bang for his buck, his dollar at the end. And again, it's one of those God through the rearview mirrors. I would have never chosen that, and I didn't choose it. I had my room picked out and paint bought, as a matter of fact, for a room over here. But God chose another avenue, out of the blue. In fact, that's, as I discerned, should I say yes or no to it, that's what my spiritual director kept coming back to. You didn't choose this, God did. There was nothing on your radar that would have said this. Take that as a sign of God's call. So I went. So go to Rome, I was there from 79 to 83. So get over there. It's called the North American College. The college is just where you live. You go to school out in the city. The Jesuits have a school, the Dominicans have a school, Benedictines have a school. So you all go out to the city for the classes. The college is just where you live. About 175 guys there when I got there from across the United States for all 4 years. Truly some of the best and the brightest across the country. So I'm now immersed in this group, but I'm way out of my league. I'm trying to figure this. I'm a kid from Baden, and I don't speak English well, and I got to now learn how to speak Italian. I have to learn a new culture. If you've ever been to Italy, you'll know it's very different. So they have these siestas. The stores will close from 1 till 4 o'clock. It might close earlier if somebody's got something going on. It might open later if the wine was good at lunch. And so you never know what's going to happen. So just being a German, it's a very different culture living in Italy. I'm in a different education system. I'm used to, like what we all know of classes, question answer with the teacher, but most of my classes in Europe, and most through Europe, it's lecture. So the teacher comes in, talks 45 minutes, and leaves. So again, just a whole new way to learn. And I am out of my element. I barely can keep my head above water, just trying to figure out and survive what's going to go on. Also during this time, remember, if you can remember back, this is the time before there's no internet. So there's no such thing as email. All we had were those airgrams, and that took 10 days to get from Rome to St. Louis and took 10 days more to get back. So you're always behind on news. Telephone calls were very expensive. There were no cell phones back. There was all landlines. I want to say the international hookup was like $15, and it was $4 a minute. Again, my family has no money, so we would call once a year. And all of that just augmented the loneliness. I have never felt so homesick in my life. Another piece of this whole thing, too, in terms of Rome, We were there for 4 years. We could only come home once, and that was our second year summer. So knowing that I'm stuck here for 2 full years in this place that I'm out of my element, can only come home for 3 months, I have to go back for 2 more years, it was just kind of overwhelming, needless to say. But it was during that time that Jesus became real for me. Again, I don't know the other 174 guys that I'm in school with. At least I don't know them well. So who do I talk to? Who do I cry with? It was Jesus. And I'm very serious. I would spend, after every evening prayer at the North American, I just bawled like a baby, crying in my homesickness. And I said, that's when Jesus became real. He became the friend I could talk to, the one I could share my heart with, the one I could be vulnerable with. And again, that would have, as I looked through that rear view mirror, that would have never happened otherwise. If I had gone to school here, that wouldn't have happened. Because I would have still had my family, my friends, I would have had all my supports. But God stripped everything from me when I went over to Rome, and it was only Him then I could rely on. And I am so grateful that He did that. It was painful as you can imagine. But in the rearview mirror, it was truly a blessing, and it would have never happened otherwise. How else could He have stripped me of any kind of sense of control or power other than that kind of experience, being shipped 7,000 miles away from home for 2 years and not, knowing what was going on? Another piece of being over there was good in that it just immersed me in history in a way that would have never happened, in particular church history. Just to kind of live the places, to see the connections of the apostles, how the word went out, the good news and all the rest. But another piece of it was this, and Bishop Privatusa always mentions this. This is the word he uses. He goes, you went to Rome? Yeah. He goes, didn't you see the church's underbelly? And it's true. I mean, I saw more ambition there than I ever want to see again in my life. But again, that was good to see it up front and close and personal. It's ugly. So just to see it, thanks, but no thanks. Again, in the rearview mirror, it was a blessing to see it as I continue on in this journey of life. But another blessing that happened in Rome, one that, again, I could have never hoped or imagined for, we of course all had to have a spiritual director through our 4 years, and there was a St. Louisan who was over there. He was a Trappist monk. All the religious communities have a generalate over in Rome just because of paperwork that has to go back and forth. He was a canon lawyer in the Trappist community, so he was over in Rome to do all of that kind of paperwork. If a monk should happen to leave the community, you have to get special kind of permission to leave because you've made these monastic kind of commitments. If a monastery is going to build a new foundation in Africa, you have to get all this canonical stuff done. So that's what this gentleman did. His name was Bernard Johnson. He was from Lime. I think St. Andrews was his home parish. But anyway, he joined Gethsemane. Then from Gethsemane, he went to the founding of Conyers, Georgia, the monastery there, then went over to Rome as their Procurator General. So he was my spiritual director all those years. And it was really good, too, to have a St. Louis connection in the midst of being out in the middle of nowhere. And he was especially good through my years of direction, kind of seeing my life's journey. I had this kind of romanticism, and romanticism I think is probably the best word I can use for it, of a monastic life perhaps, or even a missionary life. And Bernard, my director, had this great comment. He goes, Carl, the only way to make a fantasy a reality is to spend some time with it. So, as I mentioned, we could only come home once in our 4 years. So it would have been my summer between my 3rd and 4th year, my last summer in Europe. He worked it out so that I lived at a Trappist monastery in Northern Ireland, just outside of Belfast, for 5 weeks. And I lived a Trappist monk's life. I got up at 3:30 in the morning. I dug potatoes all day. I went to bed sore at 8 o'clock at night, ready to start all over again. And again, what a great experience. I could have never had that experience had I stayed here. And also, it kind of refined that romanticism and made it real. To this day, I usually make my retreats at a monastery. I usually go to Gethsemane. But I also know that's not my life's calling. There's a familiarity in it. I like the rhythm of a monastic life. And the other fantasy I had was that missionary fantasy, to go to the far ends of the earth and preach the good news and all the rest. And so again, he said, make that a reality. So after I finished my 5 weeks digging potatoes up in Northern Ireland, I get back to Rome, and 4 of us then went to India to work with Mother Teresa for 30 days. We worked 10 days in the leper colony, 10 days in the House of the Dying, and then we worked 10 days at an orphanage just outside the airport. Probably the hardest 30 days of my life. We had to get cholera shots, we had to take malaria medication throughout the whole time. In India, we were eating boiled potatoes, rice, and curry 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. We had the Indian bathrooms where you squat and use one hand with water, use the other hand for the other thing. We slept under mosquito tents. It was incredible. But again, a great experience for me. Not only did it kind of strip away my romanticism of missionary work, but it did remind me I can live pretty simply. Again, it goes back to how I was brought up, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with living simply. But I also experienced the reality that unless I can speak the language, I'm not a good missionary. Might be able to give them food. I could wash off the folks in the House of the Dying. The lepers, I could help them with their food because they had no fingers. I could help feed them, but I couldn't talk to them because I didn't speak Hindi. I didn't speak Bengali or whatever language they themselves spoke. So that kind of helped me refine what missionary work I perhaps could do, because there's still something I enjoyed about that, something I liked about that. Let me just show you real quick, and I'll leave this picture up if you want to see it. So this is the 4 of us who went to India. Just a couple of things real quick. So this is me when I had hair and it wasn't gray. That's Mother Teresa. You can see how incredibly short she is. But perhaps you can also see her hands. Again, I'll put it here. Her hands are huge. Now she's holding a manila envelope. This is my claim to fame. So we're in India for those 30 days working with the Missionaries of Charity, but Mother Teresa wasn't there. This is 1982. It's the civil war in Lebanon, and she was asked to go because she had several foundations. The Vatican asked her to go to get into Lebanon, to talk with her sisters, but also to talk to other folks, what the needs were so that the Vatican could help with the Catholic appeal, food, clothing, they need to do the ambulances, whatever. They couldn't get in because of the Civil War, but Mother could kind of sneak through, find out what the needs were, and then relay and get the help back to Beirut in particular during the Civil War. So we're ready to leave India to go back to Rome because school is going to start within a week. And we're just about ready to leave, and the brother comes up to us with this manila envelope and says, "You're going back to Rome, aren't you?" "Yeah, we got to start school next week." Well, Mother Teresa, when she's done in Beirut, she's going to go back to Rome and to talk, kind of a data download, here's what I saw, here's what they need, da-da-da-da, before she comes back to India. And again, this is back before internet days and all the rest. They goes, there's some important stuff she needs to start making decisions on, and it'll give her a head start if she could read this now, so when she gets back to us. So my claim to fame is I delivered Mother Teresa's mail. Not everybody can say that. So that's in Rome, we're delivering her mail. So after that, I get ordained. I'm here in St. Louis. My first assignment was St. Matthias, down off of Buckley Road, right by Melville High School. In fact, Melville's soccer field butted up against the soccer field of St. Matthias. And it was a wonderful first assignment. Glenn Gellner was a pastor, a wonderful, good man, one who was very engaged in the parish. He taught me that same thing, to connect with the folks. He was adamant on greeting before and after every Mass, those kinds of things. And I'm glad I was brought up from the get-go in that kind of a parish relationship. Also, Matthias was a parish of about 800 families, so it wasn't so big that it was overwhelming, but big enough that there's like a smorgasbord of ministries. And for me as a newly ordained and a guy who's been out of the country for 4 years, to kind of get an idea of what ministry might be possible. So I had a chance to kind of try a little bit of everything to kind of feel where I'd be best fit. But also during that time, I was ordained in 1983, our personnel assignments used to be every year, every priest had to fill out a personnel form. And that form basically said this: if I should be moved, I'd like to go to a parish of 500 families, check. A parish of 1,000 families, check. You know how it goes. If I should be moved, I'd like to go to a parish with a school, without a school, check on that. If I should be reassigned, would I be willing to do a specialized ministry? Would I be willing to go to Bolivia? Would I be willing to do prison ministry? Would I be willing to go into the high schools to teach? Would I be willing to do African American ministry? Check, check, check. That's how it worked. The last line was, if I should be moved, could I live with a pastor who smoked or a pastor who had a pet? Check, yes or no. So I check it. Again, I'm like, I grew up in North City. That's my home. And so I put, yeah, if I move, I'm more than happy to do African American ministry. Da, da, da. Well, I'm only at St. Matthias 3 years. It's the Saturday after Thanksgiving. The personnel director gives me a call and he says, Carl, would you mind moving in January? Sure. We're going to assign you to North City. Is that okay? That's fine with me. Just remember, I've been away from the country for 4 years. This is my first assignment. Would it be good if I got one more regular assignment before I do specialized ministry? Because at that time, it was Archbishop May always wanted us to do 2 regular assignments before we did teaching and all the rest. He kind of wanted to get grounded in parish work before we did anything else. And he said, well, here's the situation. There's a priest, it's Holy Rosary in North City, is going to leave the priesthood in January, and you are literally the only person in the diocese who said yes to African American ministry. So fine, more than happy to. And so I was 3.5 years at St. Matthias. Then I go to Holy Rosary in North City, not too far from Beaumont High School and Fairgrounds Park. That gives you any kind of a perspective of it. There for 4 wonderful years. From there then, pastor of visitation left, and they asked if I would then be pastors. I was pastor pretty younger than my classmates, just because, again, it's North City, there's not a lot of other folks in line. Most are one-man parishes, and except for the few that had an associate, and I was one of the few. So I became pastor just at 32 or 3. So I was pastor at visitation, 2 or so years in visitations right by Rank and Tech. So on Taylor and Evans, Taylor and Dr. King and Page, right in between those 2. Was there for 4 years, but in my second year, St. Anne's on Page and Whittier, a little farther east, closed. And they merged into visitation. So that's my first merger, and that's going to come in as time goes on. So I'm there just 4 years as a pastor, my first pastor. I get another one of those phone calls, this one from Bishop Stibe. He was now our auxiliary. What happened was Holy Rosary, where I just left 4 years before, and St. Engelbert, just not too far away in Penrose, were talking merger for over 16 months, couldn't come up with a decision which way. Cardinal Regali was just named the Archbishop of St. Louis. Regali, again, was a little cut and dried. He goes, I'm going to make the decision. This has been 16 months, it should go. He literally drove up on a weekend, visited both parishes. The letter came out on Monday. Holy Rosary will close, it'll merge up into St. Engelbert, it'll be a new parish. So that's why I got the phone call, because the folks from Holy Rosary said, thanks, but no thanks. You can close us, but we're not going to go up there, which of course defeats the whole purpose of a merger, which is supposed to build the numbers. So that's when Bishop Stibe says, you've just been there for 4 years. How about this? We'll give the Engelbert folks a familiar building. We'll give the Rosary folks a familiar face and see if the merger works. So that's what happened. So I left visitation, did that second merger then of Engelbert Rosary into St. Elizabeth, Mother of John the Baptist, the longest name in the diocese. And I was there for 10 years, 10, one by the happiest years of my priesthood. There for 10 years, and during that time I also merged in Blessed Sacrament Parish on Kings Highway. A year after I merged in Blessed Sacrament, I merged in their school, Bishop Healy School, with Engelbert School, which then became St. Louis Catholic Academy. Then right before I left at the end of my 10 years, I also merged in St. Philip Neri into St. Elizabeth, Mother John the Baptist. Well, it gets worse. So because I had done that again, they asked me to do it a third time. So I was asked to leave in 2005 to do the merger of St. Thomas the Apostle, St. Dismas, and Our Lady of Fatima into St. Rose Philippine de Shed, the second longest name in the diocese. I kind of have a pattern of doing that. Again, 7 wonderful years, just some men from the parish. So because I had done the heavy lifting of merging, not by choice, I promise you, they're horrible. I hate mergers. They kind of wanted to reward me, and so I was assigned Our Lady of Lourdes to kind of give the old man a rest. Wonderful parish, incredible folks, no money problems. I've never had that in my entire priesthood. This is no lie. When I was at visitation, the first week's collection always went so my staff could cash their payroll. My second week's collection always went to the Clay Gas and Ameren. The third week, I could cash my check. So here I go to Lourdes, and my God, I could cash my check on that first Sunday. It was incredible. So I was at Lourdes for 3 years. Good place, wonderful place. But I also know my home is in the city. My home is more needy parishes. Again, I can live very simply. I just feel more comfortable that way. So St. John the Baptist on Dolore, right by the Beeville Mill, if you know where that's at, they had a high school that closed in 2008, and their grade school closed in May of 2014. They asked me to go in after this. I went in June of 2014. So I basically had a parish with a ton of buildings and no way to pay for any of it. And so I was at John the Baptist for 4 years, kind of repurposing buildings. And God was very good to make that work. Then again, a situation came up in Franklin County, just outside of Washington, 2 parishes, St. Gertrude and St. Anne, with a situation. It was a first-time pastor situation where there was a school board meeting talking about closing, merging. They got a little heated, and so the diocese thought it was best to kind of clean house and just do a restart. So they asked if I would go down to do that, and I did. It was, to be honest, the longer I'm away from Franklin County, the more I miss it. Gorgeous countryside, wonderful people. It's almost like Mayberry down there. It's wonderful. So I was down at St. Gertrude and St. Anne's, Gertrude in Krakow, St. Anne's in Clover Bottom, just outside, I said, of Washington, for 4 years. And then I get the call for this job up here, out of the blue again. Again, I've never worked in an office in my life. I've always been in a parish. I've always been in poorer parishes. Here's where God in the rearview mirror comes up again. In my parish assignments, I've kind of done the trifecta. I've done rural, urban, and suburban. That's what's needed with this All Things New, to try to start pulling this together of these new changes, these new configurations. They wanted somebody who had a little broader sense of the diocese, not that anybody else could do it, but they just wanted somebody with a little broader sense of the diocese, having been in rural, urban, and suburban, to kind of help that. But for me right now, this is still a very different job for me. I've only been in parishes. I've never done office, so I'm being really stretched still. The rearview mirror hasn't come clear yet why this assignment. It's a very different way of leadership. I'm used to being pastor for 5 times, knowing how to, if something's broke, I can fix it. If this needs a change, I can make it happen. It doesn't work like that here. It's like changing the direction of a train. It just doesn't happen fast. In fact, it doesn't always happen. So it's just been a different kind of leadership. I'm now living at Joan of Arc Parish, right there on Hampton and Chippewa, in residence. So again, it's different not being pastor, just being in residence. Once again, I'm being stretched. And yet I also know if I weren't here but made pastor a 6th time, which nothing excites me about that, looking at balance sheets again and again, I would have just gone on autopilot. I just know I would have. I have an idea how it works. I know how parishes work. I know how mergers and consolidations work. I just would have gone right into the grooves that I've always known. And so at least this is where I'm at in the rearview mirror of my life now. God wants to stretch me because he knew if I had gone back to my usual, I probably would have just done that, stayed at the usual. But once again, he's stripping me of what I know, what I feel comfortable with, calling me to rely on him yet again and some more, in a way I would have never chosen, Even yesterday, I wasn't too sure I would choose it with all that stuff was hitting the news. And yet this is where God has put me. So that's my life story where I'm at right now. We've all heard that expression, you can only live life forward, but you only understand it backward. And that certainly is true of my life. But it's also true of my life. It's like that Footprints poem that we all know. At the time, I don't know why God is doing this to me. And yet when I look back, I can see his footprints carrying me. It's really true, right? I can see the connection through my whole life. Again and again and again, God made a choice I would have never made because I wouldn't have liked it. I didn't think I would, or I didn't know about it. But God did because he had a greater plan. And I have really been blessed. I look back at my life, I have lived a charmed life. I really have. And I can only thank God for that. So that's my story. From that, that's great. I will scoot out of your way.
Thank you, Father.
David,
Yeah.
could we do the prayer petitions before we go to the table?